Imagine waking up one day and realizing that nothing in your life has suddenly changed, but everything has slowly become more expensive without giving you enough time to fully process what is actually happening around you. Imagine going to the grocery store and noticing that the same items you used to buy easily now cost more, but your income has not increased in a way that keeps your lifestyle stable and predictable. Imagine paying your monthly bills and feeling that quiet pressure building up, not because of one major expense, but because of many small increases happening together over time. This is how economic collapse actually begins, not with chaos or panic, but with slow changes that most people ignore because they appear normal in the beginning. There is no single moment where everything breaks down. Instead, there is a gradual shift, where financial stability starts to weaken without making any dramatic noise. There is no single moment where everything breaks down. Instead, there is a gradual shift, where financial stability starts to weaken without making any dramatic noise. Most people expect collapse to look sudden and obvious, like markets crashing overnight or banks shutting down instantly, but reality works in a much quieter and controlled way. The system does not fail all at once. It stretches slowly until the pressure becomes part of everyday life and people begin to adapt without questioning it. At the center of this shift is the middle class, which supports most of the economy, but has the least protection against rising costs and financial pressure. As prices increase across housing, food, healthcare, and transportation, the middle class is forced to adjust spending instead of increasing income in a meaningful way. This adjustment often begins with small compromises, like cutting down on non-essential expenses or delaying purchases that once felt normal and affordable. Over time, these small compromises start to accumulate and change the overall quality of life without creating an immediate sense of crisis. People continue to work, pay their bills, and maintain routines, but the margin of comfort slowly disappears from their financial situation. What once felt stable now feels tight, and what once felt affordable now feels like a calculated decision that requires careful thinking. This is not a visible collapse, but it is a structural shift that weakens the foundation of financial stability for millions of households. As this pressure continues to build, another pattern begins to emerge that is less visible but far more important in understanding the larger economic system. Income growth does not keep up with the rising cost of living, creating a gap that cannot be closed through normal effort or hard work alone. This gap forces households to rely on credit, not as a luxury, but as a necessity to maintain the same standard of living they once had. Credit cards, personal loans, and financing options begin to fill the space between income and expenses, creating the illusion that everything is still under control. At first, this system works smoothly because payments feel manageable and access to credit seems easy and convenient for most people. But over time, the total amount of debt begins to grow, even if each individual decision felt reasonable at the moment it was made. This is where the system becomes self-reinforcing, because borrowing today creates obligations for tomorrow that must be fulfilled regardless of future conditions. As more households enter this cycle, the entire economy begins to depend on continuous borrowing to sustain consumption and growth. When millions of households participate in this pattern simultaneously, their borrowing and repayment become part of a much larger economic engine. This engine does not stop easily because it is connected to banks, corporations, and financial markets that rely on consistent activity and cash flow, which means the system is designed to keep moving forward, even if the pressure on individuals continues to increase beneath the surface. At this stage, nothing appears broken from the outside, but the internal stress within the system continues to build quietly over time. People continue to function within the system because they have no immediate alternative, even if the conditions are becoming more difficult. The collapse does not begin when people panic. It begins when they normalize pressure and accept it as part of everyday life. This normalization is what makes the situation dangerous because it hides the underlying problem behind routine and privilege habits. Most individuals do not step back to analyze the bigger picture because they are focused on managing their own immediate responsibilities. But when viewed collectively, these individual struggles form a clear pattern that signals a deeper shift within the economy. A shift where growth continues on paper, but financial stability weakens at the household level where it matters the most. As financial pressure increases, people begin to make decisions based on survival, rather than long-term planning or wealth creation. Savings become harder to maintain because a larger portion of income is consumed by basic living expenses that continue to rise. Emergency funds begin to shrink slowly, reducing the ability to handle unexpected situations without taking on additional debt. This creates a fragile system where even a small disruption can have a significant financial impact on a household. At the same time, wages do not adjust quickly enough to restore balance, leaving individuals stuck between rising costs and limited income growth. This imbalance is not temporary, it is part of a longer-term shift that affects how money flows through the economy at every level. As more people experience this pressure, consumer behavior begins to change in subtle but important ways. People start prioritizing necessities over discretionary spending, which gradually slows down certain sectors of the economy. Businesses respond by adjusting prices, cutting costs, or finding new ways to maintain profit margins in a changing environment. This creates a feedback loop where economic pressure moves back and forth between consumers and businesses over time. C'était le message de la fin. At the same time, financial institutions continue to provide credit, because lending remains one of the primary drivers of economic activity. This keeps the system moving, but it also increases the long-term obligations that households must manage. The more the system depends on borrowing, the more sensitive it becomes to changes in interest rates and economic conditions. Even a small increase in interest rates can significantly increase the cost of maintaining existing debt over time. This adds another layer of pressure on households that are already operating with limited financial flexibility. As this cycle continues, the gap between perceived stability and actual financial strength becomes wider and more difficult to ignore. From the outside, everything still looks functional, but the underlying structure becomes weaker with each passing year. And once you begin to understand this clearly, the idea of economic collapse starts to look very different. As the financial pressure on households continues to rise, another deeper shift begins to take place inside the system that is not immediately visible but has long-term consequences for the entire economy. The middle class is not only dealing with higher costs, but it is also experiencing a gradual redistribution of wealth that changes how money is concentrated across different levels of society. This redistribution does not happen suddenly or forcefully, but through slow mechanisms that move value from one group to another over extended periods of time. This redistribution does not happen suddenly or forcefully, but through slow mechanisms that move value from one group to another over extended periods of time. One of the most powerful mechanisms behind this shift is inflation, which quietly reduces the purchasing power of money without requiring any direct action from individuals. As prices rise, the real value of savings begins to decline, especially for those who are not able to invest in assets that grow faster than inflation. This means that even if someone is saving money consistently, the actual value of those savings may be decreasing over time in real terms. At the same time, individuals and institutions that own appreciating assets are able to benefit from this environment in a very different way. Assets such as real estate, stocks, and large-scale investments tend to increase in value over time, especially during periods of inflation and monetary expansion. This creates a divide where those who own assets continue to grow their wealth, while those who rely only on income and savings fall behind gradually. The gap between these two groups widens slowly, making the system more unequal without creating immediate visible tension. Because this process happens over time, it does not feel like a sudden change, but rather a natural progression that people accept as part of the economic environment. Another important factor in this shift is the role of interest rates, which influence the cost of borrowing and the behavior of both consumers and institutions. When interest rates are low, borrowing becomes easier, encouraging people to take on more debt to maintain their lifestyle or invest in opportunities. But when rates begin to rise, the cost of maintaining that debt increases, putting additional pressure on households that are already financially stretched. This creates a situation where past decisions become more expensive in the present, even though they felt manageable when they were first made. As a result, a larger portion of income is directed towards servicing debt, leaving less room for savings, investment, or discretionary spending. This shift reduces financial flexibility and increases dependence on stable income, which may not always be guaranteed in a changing economy. At the same time, corporations and large institutions often have more tools and resources to manage these changes effectively. They can adjust pricing, restructure debt, and optimize operations in ways that individuals cannot easily replicate. This gives them an advantage in maintaining stability and even growing during periods of economic pressure. While individuals are adjusting their spending to survive, larger entities are adjusting their strategies to expand and capture more value. This imbalance further accelerates the redistribution of wealth, making it harder for the average household to keep up over time. Another layer of this system is the psychological aspect, where people begin to normalize financial pressure as a permanent condition. Instead of questioning why things are becoming more difficult, they adapt their expectations and redefine what is considered normal. What once felt like financial strain becomes everyday reality, and this shift in perception reduces resistance to the underlying problem. People continue to work harder, manage their expenses more carefully, and rely on credit when necessary, all while believing that this is simply how the system functions. This acceptance allows the system to continue operating without interruption, even as the pressure continues to build beneath the surface. The collapse in this sense is not an event that happens in the future, but a process that is already unfolding in the present. It is visible in the increasing cost of living, the growing dependence on credit, and the shrinking financial margins of the middle class. It is visible in the way people talk about money, shifting from long-term goals to short-term survival and stability. It is visible in the decline of savings rates and the rise of financial stress across households. But because these changes are gradual, they do not trigger immediate alarm or large-scale reaction. Instead, they blend into everyday life, becoming part of the background rather than the focus of attention. This is what makes the situation complex, because it does not feel like a crisis even when the underlying conditions suggest otherwise. Most people are waiting for a clear signal that something is wrong, but the system is designed in a way that delays that signal as long as possible. It continues to function, to produce, and to grow on the surface, even as internal imbalances increase over time. And as long as the system continues to operate, it reinforces the belief that everything is under control. But stability on the surface does not always reflect strength underneath, especially when pressure is being absorbed silently by millions of individuals. Over time, this pressure reaches a point where small disruptions can have larger effects than expected. A job loss, a medical emergency, or a financial shock can quickly expose how fragile the system has become at the household level. When many individuals face these disruptions at the same time, the effects begin to spread across the broader economy. Consumption slows down, debt becomes harder to manage, and financial institutions begin to adjust their behavior in response. This is when the underlying stress starts to become visible, not as a sudden collapse, but as a series of connected slowdowns across different sectors. Even then, the system may not break completely, but it will continue to adjust in ways that shift more pressure onto individuals. Which means the process does not end. It evolves into new forms that maintain the same underlying pattern. And once you begin to see this pattern clearly, it becomes easier to understand why the collapse is not something that will suddenly arrive in the future. It is something that has already started, quietly shaping the financial reality of millions of people without being fully recognized. The real shift is not in markets or headlines, but in the everyday experience of managing money in a system that is becoming